Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the hefty fees some defendants pay even when they're no longer in jail and what one city is doing about it. Pioneering forensic pathologist Bennet Omalu on the dangers that contact sports pose to a child's brain. The co-founder of Nextdoor talks about helping neighbors tear down walls online. Plus, the first African-American woman to be inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame reveals how she created campaigns for diverse audiences. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with sports and concussions. Actor Will Smith played him in the film Concussion. The movie chronicled Dr. Bennet Omalu's fight to get the NFL to admit to the prevalence of traumatic brain injuries among former football players. Omalu pioneered understanding of degenerative brain disease suffered by athletes and others who have sustained repeated blows to the head. He's now written a book for parents who are struggling with whether to allow their children to play full contact sports where even one head injury could prove catastrophic. And joining me now is forensic pathologist and the author of Brain Damage in Contact Sports, Dr. Bennet Omalu. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know, the Winter Olympics are underway. Sports are on a lot of people's minds. What should parents of children under 18 know about contact sports?
Well, it's always been my position, knowing what I know, that no child under the age of 18 should play the high-impact, high-contact sports. The big six are American football, ice hockey, mixed martial arts, boxing, wrestling, and rugby. In these games, in every play, your child suffers blows to the head, and there is no safe blow to the head. Repeated blows to the head cause brain damage. If your child plays football, even after just one season, your child has suffered irreversible, irreparable brain damage. Because the brain doesn't regenerate. The brain does not have any reasonable capacity to regenerate itself. I've looked at thousands of brain cells, of brains. I'm yet to see a brain cell that is dividing normally to form a new brain cell. Once your brain cell is damaged, that is it. And this is such a big issue for many parents, right? For example, even me. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She's starting to get into sports, team sports at school. What about things like lacrosse or soccer? Are they safe? Yes. In fact, this was why I wrote my book. It's a very small book, 100 pages. You could finish it in less than 1 hour. Such questions. People are not aware of it, but lacrosse has the highest concussion rates in all sports after football. I never would have thought of that. Exactly. So lacrosse and soccer are what I call the less contact, less impact sports. No child under the age of 18 should play lacrosse. For soccer, there should not be any heading whatsoever, heading the ball whatsoever in soccer below the age of 18. Why 18? Because that is when your child's brain becomes fully developed, from 18 to 25. No heading before 18. Soccer is a high dexterity sport that requires very high levels of brain functioning. Your 7-year-old child does not have such levels of brain functioning. Are there any safe sports then? I mean, yes, of course, of course. The safe sports are the non-contact, non-impact sports: swimming, track and field, table tennis, badminton, lawn tennis, basketball, baseball, and so many other. Golf. You visit the International Olympics Committee website. There are so many of them. In the non-contact sports, repeated blows to the head are not intrinsic to the play. However, accidents can still occur. So what you do, your child must play safe. These games must be highly regulated. And if anybody plays aggressively, you take him or her out of play. My son plays basketball, and there's something his school does, St. Elizabeth and Satan in Elgrove. There's something that the school does that I love so much. So when these kids play basketball, there is no scoring of the basket. Nobody scores points, so we are the winner, we've lost. The kids play, they score baskets, and we all have fun. Well, you have said that it is, in your words, child abuse to let kids play football. Why? Knowing what we know today. As a physician, every 2-3 years, I attend child abuse classes. And I must report child abuse when I see it. I'm mandated by law. Knowing what we know today, The fundamental definition of child abuse is the intentional exposure of a child to the risk of injury. Knowing today that just one concussion causes permanent brain damage. Knowing that if a child goes in to play football by 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, by 11 a.m. after he's done playing, he has suffered brain damage. Isn't that intentional exposure of a child to the risk of injury?
Where do you draw the line, though, right? Because so many sports come with some element of risk, and athletes, if they're serious about a sport, need to begin training as youths before they're 18 to become really, really good at it, especially, let's say, for example, at the Olympic level. If someone's playing ice hockey, which you identified as a dangerous sport, I mean, how do you navigate that?
You know, that is a cast of the mind that is embedded in our mentality. That may not be true. In 1957, 11 years before I was born, the American Academy of Pediatrics published a position paper in the Pennsylvania Medical Society Journal. Don't collapse if I tell you this. In 1957, American pediatricians said that no child under the age of 12 should play football, wrestling, or boxing, that these sports do not have any place in any school on the development of any child. Now, you can't join the American military, the American Armed Forces, until you're 18. Joining the American Armed Forces at 18 has no way undermined the preparedness or readiness of the United States military. So if you're a child and you start playing the high-impact, high-contact sports, maybe a child of 6 years old, plays football, begins to play at 6, plays till 17, that's about 11 years. That child must have received hundreds of thousands of blows to his head. So by the time he's 18, his brain is no longer functioning optimally. So he's not playing at the level you would expect him to play. So if we could step back to think, what if we don't let children play till they are 18? They go through intensive training. With intact brains, they could take these games to levels we never, ever imagined, because their brains are intact, functioning at the highest levels, have not suffered any brain damage. Think about that. So if children do not play, do not begin exposure early, by 18, they may take football to exceptional levels that we've never, ever, ever seen or imagined. That's a new way to think. That's a 21st century mentality.
Well, you've given people a lot to think about, because this country does love football. As you yourself have acknowledged, football is like religion in America.
But I think every parent should buy the book and make up their mind.
All right. Dr. Bennett Omalu, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Turning now to criminal justice, San Francisco could become the first city in the nation to eliminate hefty fees that criminal defendants face after they leave jail. San Francisco Board of Supervisors President Lyndon Breed introduced a bill this week that would end the practice of charging defendants for things like electronic monitoring and jail booking. One of the bill's supporters is San Francisco Public Defender Jeff Adachi, who says that inmates often find themselves locked in a cycle of debt when they try to re-enter society. Joining me now is San Francisco Public Defender Jeff Adachi. Nice to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, first of all, can you explain what kinds of fees criminal defendants can face after they leave jail?
Well, believe it or not, when a person's convicted, say, of even a low-level felony or a misdemeanor, they could face as many as 50 fees. These are both civil and criminal penalties that are attached. And so they could amount to sometimes thousands of dollars. And so what this bill would do is eliminate 10 of the fees that are locally assessed by San Francisco government or the courts. For example, if you're placed on probation, you have to pay a monthly fee for probation, and they'll charge it up front, $1,800. And this has the effect of when a person finishes their sentence, they're saddled with fines and fees. I had a young man come into the office the other day who had thousands of dollars garnished against his paycheck, and he could barely afford to support his children.
So this has a huge impact on their lives. They're trying to get back on their feet. The jobs they're getting probably aren't paying that much. What is the long-term impact on these people? Can they re-enter society if they're having their pay garnished in this way?
Right. We want to encourage people to live productive lives, crime-free lives, not feel like they have to break the law in order to support their families. And a lot of people in San Francisco are in this situation. And so if you're going to burden them with fines and fees, it's kind of like a payday loan in a sense, right? Because you plead guilty, and a lot of people plead guilty just to get out of jail because they can't afford bail. And then when they get out of jail, they have this huge debt on their back. And what's going to happen? They're going to feel more pressure to do something desperate in order to pay these fines and fees.
And there's a racial component to this. San Francisco is known as a very progressive city, but we have some of the deepest racial inequity here. We have a situation where African Americans make up less than 6% of the city's population, but they account for more than half of those in jail.
Right. And our numbers are actually worse than Ferguson. And if you look at even categories of crime like drugs, where all the studies show that actually whites use, abuse, and sell drugs more than African Americans do, they're arrested at 6 times the rate. So we have this basic inequity, and it also applies to these fines and fees, because the fines and fees are primarily assessed against people of color, and that results in whole communities being affected by these policies.
What would you say, though, to people who feel that it costs cities to administer these programs, like probation, for example, electronic monitoring, and they feel these defendants were convicted of crimes, and therefore they should pick up some of the costs of these programs? Well,
you know, the justice system is not supposed to be based on how much money you have. I mean, for example, Bernie Madoff was out on bail because he could afford his own security detail. But, you know, for the average person, you know, should we really be requiring them to pay the cost of supervision or the cost of, and a lot of these fines and fees have nothing to do with the crime itself. They're like construction fees for courthouse, assessment fees for a DNA database. And so what we want is to make sure that if there is going to be a fine and fee assessed, that it actually has something to do with the crime. For example, restitution would not be affected. That's when you pay back the cost of a broken window or injuring somebody, and that won't be affected.
You've also been a long-time advocate of bail reform. What are the biggest issues that you have now with the current bail system?
Yeah, we've filed over 8 lawsuits in federal and state court. We've been pushing for bail reform in the state legislature. There's a huge bail lobby who, you know, only the United States and the Philippines are only 2 countries that allow a for-profit bail system. So we want to change that. And we don't think that the idea of just posting money, I mean, you could be out of jail on a murder charge if you have the money to post for bail, whereas a person who's got $1,000 bail can't get out of jail if they can't afford it.
So what's the criteria that you want for bail then, if it's not a cash-based system?
It'll be based on things like how many times you failed to appear in court in the past, public safety. There's a number of other factors that can be looked at, which are much more predictive of what a person may do in the future, and more importantly, whether the person is going to come back to court. Bail should just be a means. We have a presumption of innocence in this country, but it should simply be a means of ensuring that somebody comes back to court.
And last October, you announced plans to file challenges in every single criminal case where bail is set. Right. How many challenges have you filed, and how many of those actually resulted in bail being lowered or some kind of alternative to incarceration?
We filed over 800 motions, and what we did is we asked the judges to apply the law. And we've had a number of decisions from the higher courts saying that the judges are violating the law because they're not considering a person's ability to pay, and they're not making a record as to why they're denying bail. We've been very successful. We've, in about 1/3 of the cases, had bail reduced or had people released. So we know that it's working. But this is part of an overall reform, and it needs to change. California is really behind the ball. We have bail reform in Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland. We need to have it here in California.
And under the broader umbrella of criminal justice reform, there's something very interesting happening with the June elections, right? We have about 12 judges up for re-election in June in San Francisco. We have 4 public defenders running against them. Very rare for incumbent judges to face challengers. What do you think is driving this?
Well, these 4 public defenders decided to run in this race that's coming up in June. And it's unusual because we don't have a lot of public defenders who are appointed directly to the bench. We've only had 1 in 40 years, and we often see prosecutors. Now, these particular public defenders are running against 4 judges who were appointed by Republican governors. And I certainly will support them. I think it's important that...
Why do you think they're running, though? Is it driven in part, why this year? Is it driven in part by what we're seeing happening under the Trump administration, or other factors?
Both of those things. You're seeing Trump appointing a lot of judges, but beyond that, you're seeing this whole push for criminal justice reform and mass incarceration. they want to change this, and I think that's part of the motivation for them running against judges. And
are you supporting them, endorsing the public defenders who are running?
Yes, I am going to support their effort. And again, this is about making sure that people understand why it's important to have judges from both sides of the aisle.
All right, San Francisco Public Defender Jeff Adachi, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Tui.
Now to tech. Prakash Janakiraman is the co-founder and chief architect of Nextdoor. The San Francisco company allows neighbors to create private networks online to share resources and information about their communities. According to the company, more than 180,000 neighborhoods from the U.S. to Europe are using Nextdoor to share hyper-local content. And we want to disclose that KQED is a media partner of Nextdoor, using its service to deliver content to 4 Bay Area cities. Nextdoor co-founder Prakash Janakiraman is with us now in the studio. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tui.
So how did the idea for Nextdoor come about?
So about 7 years ago, when we first started the company, we noticed a trend of social networks becoming more ubiquitous and mainstream. Facebook for your friends, Twitter to connect with people with whom you shared interests, and of course LinkedIn for your professional network. But we found it sort of strange that there was not a network where you could connect with the people right outside your front door, your neighbors, the people that were most important to you in your local community. And so we set out to build a resource that connected neighbors to the information that was most relevant to them, and that's how Nextdoor came about.
So what are some of the most interesting interactions you've seen among neighbors on Nextdoor? Because, you know, I've used it. I've used it to ask for moving boxes when I was moving, and then gave it back to other people when I wasn't. I posted about them, and there are certainly a lot of posts I see about missing dogs and found dogs. But there was also someone who found an organ donor.
Yeah, that's right. We've seen everything from day-to-day kinds of recommendations that neighbors exchange with one another for babysitters, plumbers, auto mechanics, but we've also seen more critical use cases, especially around disasters where, for example, in Hurricane Harvey or the Napa wildfires or the Ventura County wildfires, we've seen neighbors banding together when the public infrastructure is under a lot of strain, especially 911 or first responders. And in the case of the liver donor, we did see that a neighbor put out a message saying, hey, one of our neighbors is in the hospital and looking for someone to donate an organ. And we actually found a liver donor within the neighborhood community, if you can imagine that. So a wide variety of different use cases.
Yeah. But, you know, there are lots of other entities that offer similar services, right? You could do Facebook groups. Craigslist has a function where you could form a group. There are homegrown forums. Why should people use Nextdoor? What sets you apart?
So I think there are two things that really set us apart. The first is when you look at networks like Facebook or Twitter or some of these other social networks, these are largely platforms for self-expression. They're a place for you to share photos, status updates, and really reveal a little bit more about yourself. Nextdoor is purely utility driven. People are coming to Nextdoor to use their neighbors as a resource to help them solve problems. And the second thing that I think is unique about Nextdoor is everyone that you're interacting with is a verified member of the neighborhood community. Each neighborhood is a geographically bounded entity on Nextdoor.
How do you verify that they actually live there?
We have a number of different ways that we verify. We can do mobile phone verification. We can do verification via postcard through the mail, where you redeem an invitation token that proves that you actually had to go to your mailbox and take it out. We have a number of different verification mechanisms. And once people are verified, that increases the level of trust that they're interacting with people who are actually in their neighborhood and facilitates a wide variety of more intimate types of exchanges than on these other platforms.
In this world now where the internet is so ubiquitous, as you say, there is a concern that people aren't interacting face-to-face more. So why is a neighborhood social network necessary? Why can't neighbors just go out and say, hey, hi, I'm your neighbor, let's chat face-to-face?
Yeah, I think we are combating a trend that has been happening in the United States, especially over the past 50 years, of a decline in community. In fact, one of the inspiring statistics that we saw when we started the company was that 29% of Americans claim to know very few of their neighbors, and 28% of Americans claim to know not a single neighbor by name. So you're talking about over half the population with very weak ties into their community. And so as strange as it may seem in our kind of modern technological world, to use an app to facilitate these in-person interactions in the community, it actually is happening. We feel like our job is best performed when an online interaction on Nextdoor leads to an offline interaction. For example, your box story. When you needed boxes, ultimately you had to go interact with someone to exchange the boxes, and now you know a new neighbor in your community. And we see that all the time.
You've also had some growing pains, like many tech companies. There have been some problems with racial profiling. Residents were posting urgent alerts, for example, about people of color in their neighborhoods. Yeah. What have you done to address this?
Yeah, first, we were definitely shocked to see our platform being used in this way, and especially as a Bay Area native, hearing about communities in Oakland where we first became aware of this happening was a real shock to the system. But we worked together with these communities to redesign our product in a way that I think is almost unprecedented in technology, where we changed the product. So a few things that were really important to us were, number one, to make people aware of the fact that they were using descriptive text without the context around what actually was suspicious about the activity. So we introduced friction into the posting process to force people to be more specific about the circumstances under which they were posting, not to be purely describing people on the characteristics of their race without some additional context as to what was suspicious. A person, a person of color riding a bike in a neighborhood is not in and of itself worthy of putting out an urgent alert to all of your neighbors. But if they're casing the neighborhood or breaking into cars, now that's the descriptive text that accompanies it. So
then what kinds of posts, how do you regulate something like this, right? Because what about other kinds of posts that other people may find offensive, maybe concerning gender or religion? I mean, where do you draw the line? Well, we expect through our community guidelines that neighborhood leads are responsible for sort of mandating the social decorum of the communities in which we land this product. So, understanding that we are in 180,000 different neighborhoods across the country, the product takes on a lot of the identity of the communities in which you land it. And so there are, in some cases, local specific issues that need to be discussed, but need to be done with civil discourse in mind. And so our community guidelines, our neighborhood leads, and then we have a support team back at HQ that helps when those neighborhood leads feel like they're a little bit beyond their capability to handle things. But we try and self-moderate. And in 10 seconds, are you making any money yet? We are starting to earn revenue through sponsored posts, native feeds, native advertising in the feed and in our emails, and now with realtors as well. Okay, took 8 years to get here, but congratulations on making some money. Thank you so much. Nextdoor co-founder Prakash Janakiraman, thank you so much. Thank you. Say hello to Papa Fresh. The Pillsbury Doughboy, secret deodorant, and the U.S. Army. What do these ads have in common? The same woman is behind these and other memorable ad campaigns. For decades, Carol Williams has worked to market products to more diverse markets. In the process, she changed how women view themselves, and she spoke directly to African-American audiences. Last year, Williams became the first African-American woman to be inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame. She sat down earlier with KQED's Monica Lamb.
Carol Williams, CEO and Advertising Hall of Famer, thanks for talking with me.
Thank you, I'm honored.
Well, you are known in the advertising world for a campaign you did for the deodorant Secret. The tagline was,
"Strong enough for a man, but made for a woman."
I need my secret.
Oh, Dad spray isn't good enough for you.
How did you come up with that?
It was one of those times as a creative when you recognize how women are looked at versus who women actually are. In the media, they were consistently portrayed as weak individuals. They had no need of an efficacious antiperspirant.
A man, a woman, both work hard, both perspire.
Yet the women that I knew, those women sweat. Whether it was in the workplace or with their families, they were working 24/7, and at the end of the day, they wanted to look good.
And still feel dry like a woman. pH Balance Secret.
So you didn't just change perceptions of the product, you also changed how women looked at themselves.
Absolutely, that's what it's about. That campaign opened the door to begin a history of advertising that speaks to the strength of women. That door was first opened with Strong Enough for a Man, but Made for a Woman.
You made a series of videos for the Army.
I was one of those guys who didn't think the Army had anything for me.
What was your assignment there?
The United States Army had once enjoyed very high participation from African Americans. So the effort was to make African Americans aware of the benefits of the United States Army.
I was surprised at what I found in being an officer and at what the Army helped bring out of me.
What educational benefits, what occupational training was available, where even after their tenure in the Army, they would be able to come out and have viable jobs.
How do you get a brand or a product to speak to somebody? How do you get them to say, that's my brand, that's my product?
We did an ad for Disney.
Grandpa, let me tell you about my trip. I went to a safari.
Disney was very, very interested in increasing African-American presence in their parks.
Imagination, inspiring imagination.
They really thought it was a price thing. We looked at it, we recognized that it was bigger than that. We really talked about how Disney infused your child with knowledge.
Next time, will you come with me?
Come live your dream. Disney Parks.
You produced a series of videos for the YMCA about water safety, and it was targeted at multicultural kids. Why did you feel it was important to do that?
Young black men were dying at disproportionate numbers, especially in urban areas, not being exposed to swimming pools or swimming lessons. Less African-American women were dying of that issue, and I think that's because the way we perceive ourselves in our hair, we were just naturally saying, nah, we're not going in the pool, thank you very much. We'll just stay on the sidelines with the swimming pool and look good.
Everybody actually can learn how to swim.
So YMCA engaged us to help get this message out. The importance of learning how to swim and dispelling the myth that African Americans can't swim. Anybody can swim if you learn how to swim. I am more than honored to have this special recognition.
How did it feel to be inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame?
Being inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame was the most incredible experience that I had had. We'll see the magic that once made this industry great. As an African-American woman, I just put my head down and enjoyed what I did.
Gotta go. Keeping up. It takes hard work.
And then to be able to portray African Americans through my eyes as I know them, what a magnificent thing to be able to do. It's been a great journey.
Well, congratulations again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that will do it for us. You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.